all of the stories and faces are so important, but I think what moved me the most was the story of Emma Hill. The story says she was in a car and they were traveling north on 22nd Street. And the Pinellas County Sheriff had gotten permission from the city police. You wouldn't call it a sting, but they had a warrant and they were looking for someone. And so the sheriff deputized a posse of men, and they came into the black community looking for this man. We know his name, but I can't recall it right now. And so the car that Emma Hill was in came and turned north on 22nd Street, and all of a sudden there were these white deputized men sort of standing on each side of the street telling them to stop. And they were not sure who those men were. They didn't look like law enforcement, so they didn't stop. They didn't race off, but they didn't stop. And there were quite a few young people in the car, and Emma was sitting in the back of the car, and this deputized posse opened fire on the car. And a bullet shot hit Emma in the back of her head, and she died. And the very next day in the paper, they were exonerating everybody the very next day, which said there was no intent on really identifying who killed Emma Hill.
The other stories are not tragic.
Yes.
I want to think of Elijah Moore.
Yes.
He was known on 22nd Street and throughout the community, really, as Mr. I Got Him. He could always be found with his cart, pushing a cart, selling produce. He was one of the few black people who could go into white neighborhoods, as I recall.
Do you remember he'd be on Central Avenue for the parades? He wore a top hat and tails. It could be 100 degrees, and he had on his top hat and tails.
That story reminds me of a gentleman named Henry Bonner.
Yes.
He was called the Rag Man. He would also push a cart and go around the neighborhood and call out, "Rags, rags," and people would give him their old clothes.
He would buy them. He
Pardon?
was buying rags
buying
from them.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we always ask people, what do you think that he did with those? And what he did with those was sell them to the Times Publishing Company, which converted the rags into paper.
Paper for the newspaper.
Yeah.
And then we can't leave without talking about Betty Fuller.
Well, Betty Fuller was renowned for dancing at the Manhattan Casino. I think that she lived in Peppertown, maybe, did she?
Yes, earlier she did.
Early on.
And I graduated from high school with her daughter, who was the physical education teacher at Boca Ciega, but she also was the elevator operator at Webb City. And Betty Fuller loved to dance, and so anytime the Manhattan was open, Betty was there dancing. When Betty died, my parents knew her very well, and they went to her wake. My mother came back and she was just appalled. I can't believe she did that. And I said, what did she do? She had a disc jockey at her mother's wake, and people got up and danced. And I said, but Mama, that's who Miss Betty was. And her daughter was honoring her by people dancing at her wake. And you know, when we talk about history, I think it's very important for people to know the relationships that existed between African Americans and Jewish people, because people don't understand that, but that we were very much in the same place as it relates to discrimination, and so we relied on each other and actually set up businesses that supported one another in our communities.